Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is about training, and we're asking the question, are you showing or growing? So what this is in relation to is often in training with clients of kind of all spectrums, we have to cover the concept of showing or growing, and what this means is, are you doing exercises in which you're just kind of testing your strength or showing what you can do, and that would be the showing effect. And this might be like a 1 rep max, or if somebody kind of like does some warm-ups and then work up to one really hard set of something, but that's kind of all they do. So they come into the gym, maybe they BS with some friends, they work up to a failed 1 rep max on a bench press. Then they kind of talk about how the music wasn't right, or, there's a fly buzzing around their face, or I'm picking on somebody in this next one, but the ceiling tiles weren't lined up in line with the bar, and they felt like it threw their body kind of a little bit crooked. So I have heard it all. So their dog ate their homework, everything. So they have their excuse for why they missed their 1 rep max. They BS with some friends, they do some back down sets, some light fluffy stuff, while still BSing with friends, complaining about their girlfriends and all this lovely stuff. And they kind of go home, and then they come back next week and try a brand new 1 rep max, and amazingly it doesn't go any better. So there are those people who just come into the gym, they kind of hee-haw around, and they try for a couple big efforts in the gym, but that's about where their focus is. Just a few hard effort big things. That's it. Just kind of like showing what their body can do. Then there are people who kind of go into the gym, and they're there because they're supposed to be there. Maybe they even like it. But they don't really do anything that amazing. They just kind of do some warm-ups. And their last warm-up, which looks like a warm-up, they call a working set. And somehow they think that's hard enough, and they move on to the next exercise. But yet if you're watching them, you're like, what the hell? Like where was the struggle? So you did 10, but it looked like you could have done 20. But yet they'll say, oh, that was good. And then they move on to the next exercise. So they're kind of like not showing, in the sense that they don't do anything really significant, and therefore their results kind of slow down. So what we want to look for is, are we doing the things that grow us versus the things that kind of show or don't show? And that's what we kind of cover in this podcast. So the first thing I want to talk about is, in this podcast, I'm going to be discussing time under tension, in terms of if you're doing an exercise and it lasts a certain number of seconds before you reach muscular failure, what that effect would be. So we're going to talk about, in regards to lifting weights, in regards to muscle damage. And sometimes when we use the term kind of like bodybuilding or size, like hypertrophy, that implies that we want the muscle to get bigger. However, if you don't want your muscles to get bigger, you would just change the way you eat. So too often I see, it's mostly females, but it doesn't have to be just females, but too often I see people say they don't want to lift too aggressively because they don't want to get big. I could go in, I should do a whole podcast just about that. But there's a lot to unpack in that statement. But in general, if you want muscles to get bigger, you have to, first of all, lift something heavy enough that damages the muscle. And then you have to eat excessive calories that will allow you to build your muscle. So, if you are a female or a male, and you're wanting to get nice, toned, shaped body, but you don't want to, quote-unquote, look like a man, you don't want to build too big of muscles, how intensely you train will not dictate that result. You can train like a bodybuilder, and you will not look like a bodybuilder. The difference is what you eat. So if you're in a caloric deficit, so say you're in a diet because you want to get leaner, but you want to have nice shaped muscles, you still need to lift very aggressively. You need to cause muscle damage. You need to beat the living crap out of your muscles, so that way your body can go through and fix and repair them. It can strengthen them. It can balance out the shape of the muscles. And that recovery process helps you burn more calories. So we did a podcast relatively recently, somewhere in the last 20, about how you can use muscle damage to increase fat loss. So lifting heavy and aggressively is very, very, very helpful, and absolutely should be done, even if somebody is just wanting to lose weight and quote-unquote tone up. Okay? So if you have the goal of losing weight and quote unquote toning up, and you don't feel like you're getting really good results, ask yourself, are you training intensely? So you might be training to where something kind of burns a little bit, but are you actually causing muscular failure in your exercises? Are you actually lifting something heavy enough to make the muscles fail at the job that you're asking them to do? If not, and that's probably why you're plateaued and why you're not making much progress, because you're just going to the gym and you're moving some weights around, you're burning a few calories, but you're not getting the actual positive effects of weight training. So we're going to talk about this, but I wanted to hit that right away, is that if you follow this advice, and we were talk about the effects of exercises causing muscle damage and giving you the potential to grow, it does not mean you will actually grow. Your food has to be supported. So I can promise you that this is true from science. I also know from my own self. So I used to train like a maniac when I was younger, but I underate because I was afraid of getting fat. I never built any muscle, and I just stayed fat because I actually underate and overexercised. So I've had tons of clients over the years where let's say females, for example, they want to get into good bikini condition, so bikini shape for the summer or for a contest, and they train their butts off. We rip their muscles to shreds and train them quote unquote like a bodybuilder because, like we said, their diet is controlled. That muscle damage is going to equate to more calories burned. It's going to keep their metabolism higher so they can actually eat more food while they're in the caloric deficit, and it makes the process happen faster and more efficiently. Okay? So if you have lifted heavy, quote unquote, before, and you felt like it made you bigger, that would be because you did not control your diet. So you were not in a caloric maintenance or a caloric deficit. So maybe you did have a little bit of a surplus that you could have potentially kind of sort of built some muscle. But guess what? It takes a long freaking time to build muscle. So if you trained really hard for 2 or 3 workouts and said, oh, my arms got bigger, or oh, my legs got bigger, what that would have been in response to is maybe some water retention due to the muscle damage being a new stimulus for you. So maybe, like, it's true, like if you do a whole bunch of squats, the next day you might have, your jeans might be a little bit tighter just due to all the water retention from the muscular stress of really heavy leg training day. That does not mean you built more muscle. So building muscle takes forever. So it can take an entire year to build like 10 pounds of muscle. So you saying you got big because you lifted a few times does not add up. Now, I'm not saying that you didn't feel what you felt. So if you did feel thicker, me telling you no is not going to help because you knew what you felt. And what you probably did feel was maybe some water retention. And so that's probably longer than I needed to go into. But I did want to cover that right away. So if you are afraid to listen to this advice because you're afraid it'll make you too big, don't have that fear. Just control your diet and understand that muscle damage is actually going to help you in your process. Okay? So, in general, when people are training for strength, so powerlifting, strongman, or they just want to be strong, so they just want to lift cool, heavy single rep things, chances are they probably overemphasize too much of the heavy stuff. So the showing stuff rather than the growing stuff. So they like we said, they kind of blow through their warm-ups. They kind of make sure their warm-ups are easy enough so that way they can have that one really big set. And then after that big set, maybe they do 1 or 2 extra sets afterwards, maybe an exercise here or there. But they're not investing a significant amount of their workout into that other stuff. So there's a rule in the world of kind of strength training and power training and athletic training in terms of trying to make somebody bigger, faster, stronger kind of stuff. And that is about 80% of your training should consist of the things that isolate and focus on weaknesses and individual small strengths, things that kind of build up to the big picture. Then only 20% of your training should be the big picture things. So let's just take a quick example and say I want to get better at squats. We have kind of like a 1 rep max on squats. That would be your 20%. So that's where you really want to put everything together. You want to see how you're doing. Maybe even do like up to sets of like 2 or 3 or 4, even 5. So the time under tension for quote unquote showing strength is about 10 seconds or less. So, and there's a bunch of arguments about like whether it's 5 seconds or less or 1 second, whatever. It's just a short burst of explosive power. That would be showing what you're capable of. And that would be the equivalent of, say, doing like a 3 rep max or a 2 rep max or a 1 rep max, something heavy. But that should only be 20% of your training. You should still have 80% of your workout to go from there. And that would be things that help build your quads or help build your hamstrings or help build your glutes, help build like hip stability, maybe your core, like lower back, abs. Maybe you need to work on different kind of bracing with upper body bracing. Maybe get your shoulder blades in place correctly so that way the bar sets correctly in your upper back. Maybe you have some muscular imbalances that you need to address by doing unilateral activities. So that should be the bulk of your training. So if you are a kind of strength or power athlete, and that's what you want to train as, you should have 80% of your training coming from activities completely different, like we said, than like a 1 rep max. So let's run through the time under tensions here. So we said like for activities about 1 to 10 seconds of length, that kind of shows or tests your strength output. And it gives you a chance to kind of work on your technique of really heavy, like explosive singles or like low rep sets. But that's not really a bulk of your training. That should be, like we said, within the 20% range. 80% of your training should come from outside of that range. So it is true that you do have to do heavy lifts to get better at heavy lifts. So there was an example of somebody in our gym recently. They were following a program from somebody else, and they had went through what they called a hypertrophy block. And there's a whole bunch of things we can go into with that being wrong. But they came out of a training section for several weeks where they were training at like 5 reps or more. So maybe doing sets of 8, like maybe sets of 10. Next week they'd add weight, do sets of 8. Next week they'd add weights, do sets of 6. Then maybe they'd try sets of 4. But then they'd cycle back through. And then right after that block, right after those weeks, they were supposed to do a 1 rep max their very next workout. So maybe they had a deload week in between, but that was it. They were supposed to go from all those high reps down to a 1 rep max, and what do you know? It didn't go well. Well, no shit. So I'm not surprised on that, because there would have been no technique refinement, no technique practice of a single rep. So performing a 1 rep of a squat, bench, or deadlift, for example, it's a very different process than performing sets of 10. So, or set 8s or even 6s. So they should have had time in their programming to practice leading up to that 1 rep max, not just been thrown right into the 1 rep max. So that's not going to go well. So it is true that if we want to be very good at things at 10 seconds or less, we do have to practice them. You do have to do them. However, you should still have 80% of your training coming from other areas. Okay? And what are those other areas? That's things maybe 10 to 20 seconds long. And that's stuff that's still heavy, but it's lighter for strength. And it starts to kind of get into a little bit of muscular damage where you're under tension long enough to start to shear force tear up the muscles. And that'll start to get that muscular damage that we want. So typically, activities of 10 seconds or less will cause minor amounts of muscle damage, but enormous amounts of joint stress and connective tissue stress. When you do lighter activities, incrementally lighter, you're going to get incrementally more muscle stress and damage and incrementally less joint stress and damage. So an activity of 10 to 20 seconds compared to something 10 seconds or less gives you a little bit less stress on the joints, gives you a little more stress on the muscles, but it's still mostly a strength-based activity. So you're not going to get like a bodybuilder, for example, whose goal is to build muscle tissue. They're not going to spend an enormous amount of time at activities of 10 seconds or less. It's definitely going to be in their training from time to time, especially in weaker body parts in terms of physical weakness or size weakness. So maybe they need that heavy shearing force to kind of give a shock to their muscles. So when I have females who do not have very good glute development, we make sure we mix in some heavy stuff, because too often they come to me from already doing programming that involved a ton of like pump stuff, like bodyweight stuff out the wazoo, and maybe they did some heavy sets of like 10 on hip thrusters, but all of their stuff would be like 30 seconds or more. So sometimes adding in some really heavy deadlifts, once you teach the safe form and they're braced well enough and to be safe, doing heavy deadlifts at 10 to 20 seconds like per set is a great way to kind of spark glute growth. So if there's anyone listening to this and you're struggling to get your glutes to grow, make sure you're lifting heavy enough too. So don't just do all that light, fluffy stuff that you see on Instagram. Okay? Now, the next range we might want to look at is 20 to 30 seconds of time under tension. And again, that's a little bit lighter than where you were at previously in the other times under tensions. But it's still kind of heavy for bodybuilders. So with that 20 to 30 second time under tension, you're going to kind of get a mixture of strength and size, but more so size. And what we mean by that is muscular stress. So again, if you don't overeat your diet, you won't get bigger muscles. You'll just get more muscle damage, which will help you get leaner and tighter muscles, more well-rounded muscles. So traditionally, bodybuilders, when you're looking for aesthetics, so anybody listening to this who just wants to look better, they don't care how much they 1 rep max on anything. They want to look better, be leaner, have nice rounded muscles, just kind of look better naked. That's your goal. Then you want to spend the majority of your training in that 20 to 30 second time under tension and 30 to 60 second time under tension, because those are going to have the greatest degrees of muscular damage with lower amounts of joint stress, which is going to allow you to train more frequently and get your volume up, which is tied into muscular change. So spending most of your time in 20 to 30 seconds for your quote-unquote heavy stuff, and then 30 to 60 seconds for your quote-unquote normal stuff, and then every once in a while throwing in some kind of like metabolic damage kind of burner set at like 60 second plus, where you're going to get some muscle endurance, cardiovascular endurance, and even some joint restoration when you do that stuff. It's a great mix. So for aesthetics and general population, general health, you should spend your training sessions somewhere between 20 to 30 seconds for, say, 20% of your activities. Then the rest of your training, 80%, should come from 30 to 60 seconds. So I tend to think of the extremes of either end being what I want in that 20% range. So for bodybuilders, we know 60 second plus activities, they're usually too light to cause muscle damage, but they're going to be really good for just annoying the crap out of muscles, and that can sometimes get a growth, but it's not the base of what you want your program structured off of. So in 20% of your training, you should have activities of 20 to 30 seconds of time or attention and activities of 60 second plus. Then 80% of your training should come from that 30 to 60 second window. So when I do training for programming for bodybuilders, and this would be aesthetics, so figure, fitness, bikini, men's classic physique, men's physique, all that stuff. Anything that's aesthetic based, that's basically what their training breaks down to. And it depends. If they're a little bit of a weaker athlete, I tend to spend a little bit more time on the heavier stuff. If they're already super duper strong, I spend less time on it. So it's an individual preference based how you split that up. But generally that's how it's structured. So 20% of your training should come from 20 to 30 second activities and 60 second plus activities. And then 80% of your training should come from 30 to 60 second activities. Now, what if you're that strength or power athlete? You do need more out of those lower time under tensions, but you still want to stick to that 80-20 range, okay? You still should throw in something every now and then at 60 second plus, that way you're not a fat ass and get out of breath doing anything you do. So if you get out of breath tying your shoes, you need to do more activities of 60 second plus. So you can flip a tire, do battle ropes, even get on a rower. God forbid we do CrossFit things, but it helps. So the more cardiovascularly fit you are, you can recover better between your sets of the most explosive activities, and you actually recover better in between workouts as well. So there is some need for that kind of stuff in your training, even if you're a strength athlete. Now, what about those 1 to 10 second activities? So 3 rep maxes, 2 rep maxes, 1 rep maxes. Again, that should only be in the 20% window of your training. 80% of your training should come from that higher time under tensions. And you could argue that for strength athletes, you can go down to about 10 second windows, up to 60 seconds. So about 80% of their training should come from that. So their window is a little bit bigger. So we said 80% for bodybuilders or aesthetic trainers, athletes, should be about that 20 to 60 second. So for strength athletes and power athletes, we can probably stretch it to about 10 to 60 seconds. Somewhere in that range should cover 80% of their training. So too often I see people come in, and again, they do all their light warm-up stuff because they know they're supposed to, because people are more aware of that nowadays. But then they go in and they do something stupid heavy, crazy aggressive, and then they kind of hee-haw around and piss around with the rest of their stuff, and then they wonder why they're not really getting any better. So 80% of your training should come from that stuff that most people are blowing off, and you should be putting 100% of yourself into that. If you're only putting, half of yourself into 80% of your training, you're not going to get great results. Okay? So I realize I got way into numbers on this one, but I think the last couple podcasts we've been doing about training, I've gotten a little too general. So I wanted to get a little more specific for those out there who would like more specific information. So that's kind of the idea. So in your training, again, just quick review, is if you're a strength kind of power athlete, you want to focus on 20% of your training coming from that 1 to 10 second activities and throwing in some 60-second plus activities every now and then, so those extremes. And then 80% of your training should come from the stuff in the middle, about 10 to 60 seconds of time and retention. Okay? And real quick, the 10 to 30 second time and retentions, whatever you do in that range, you're going to probably get a little bit stronger on that exercise if you want that exercise to get stronger in relation to a bigger lift. If you want more muscle tissue, you probably want to focus more on 30 to 60 seconds. So if you want to make your hamstrings stronger, you would do stuff 10 to 30 seconds long. If you want to make your hamstrings bigger, you would do stuff 30 to 60 seconds long. So there is a difference. So in my program for strength and power athletes, we do work on muscular balances to help protect the joints. So if you have really big quads and really tiny hamstrings, you're going to blow out your knee. Okay? Your knee is not safe. Your hip is not safe. So you have to have some balance between musculature size. So that way when you're putting force through your joints, the force is more balanced. So aesthetics is important for power and athletes. So it doesn't mean you have to be lean. I'm not saying you have to be 3% body fat. But aesthetics in regards to muscular balance is extremely, extremely important. So usually my best athletes in power and sport are actually pretty damn lean. They almost look like bodybuilders. And we probably could argue to get them onto an aesthetic stage, and they'd probably do really well. So for your aesthetic people, general population, people just want to look better naked, as we said, that about 20% of your training should come from that kind of like 20 to second time frame and that 60 second plus, but then 80% of your training should involve activities of 30 to 60 seconds. So, how do you know all this? Is I've literally taken my phone and used a timer and just timed a set. So I'll pick an exercise, I'll pick a weight that I think I could do for say 10 reps, and I'll time the set and see how long it takes. Maybe it took me 20 seconds. Well, now I know that 10 reps of that exercise takes about 20 seconds. And then I adjust my weight accordingly or adjust my reps accordingly. And because all exercises are a little bit different. So 10 reps of squats can take a freaking minute, whereas 10 reps of barbell curls can take 20 seconds. So you have to time that stuff out to kind of get an idea of where you're at. We do have programs built around that. So if anyone is looking for a program built on time and retentions rather than rep ranges, reach out to us and we'll figure a way to kind of make it out for you. So it's not a general population handout, it's more specific to the clients I've had in the past, but we can probably figure something out and make it work. So if you're interested, shoot us an email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. But that's the idea. Now, there are things that kind of muddle up those time frames. So for example, if you're doing circuits or supersets, even if you have shorter time frames per set, but you're doing a circuit of say 3 or 4 exercises, you're going to get more muscular damage, more endurance effects out of those shorter time under tension ranges. So even if I was doing something for just 20 seconds, but I'm doing 3 or 4 exercises in a row, that would be the equivalent of doing something kind of a higher time under tension, getting more endurance or muscle damage effect. We also have things like short rest singles. So if we have a power lifter who wants to get better at, like, say, a deadlift, and they need to get better at their initial deadlifts because at competitions they're only going to pull 1 rep. So we need them to get better at 1 rep. So you might see in some people they do like a set of 5. The first one looks like crap, and then all of a sudden reps 2, 3, 4, and 5 kind of look good. Well, that doesn't help. When you go to a meet, you get judged on the first rep because you only do 1 rep. So sometimes instead of having them do 2 sets of 5, which is 10 reps, we'll have them do 10 singles, where they do a rep, wait 20, 30 seconds, do a rep, wait 20, 30 seconds, do a rep. That does work on strength technique. It also works on strength endurance, which is different than muscular endurance or cardiovascular endurance. So there is such thing as strength endurance, which is, can I be strong for long? Can I do it for several reps? So that is the idea. So we have different protocols and stuff like rest pauses, drop sets, giant sets. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there that can influence this a little bit. But those time frames I gave you are good recommendations and good places to kind of consider and start from. Okay, so that was a lot, and I hope it was helpful. But like I said, I wanted to get into a little bit of nitty-gritty details of training, just so people can see what all is involved in this stuff. And this is still an overview. This isn't even the details of the details. This is just an overview of the details. So think about it in yourself, in your training. Are you showing or growing? So are you going in and just lifting stupid, crazy stuff and then blowing off the rest of your workout? If so, you're absolutely shortchanging yourself. You're definitely going to plateau and or get injured. You're going to wonder why you've been working for years and years and years, and this one lift just doesn't seem to change. Probably because you lift too damn heavy too often, and you don't have the intensity needed and the time frames correct for your assistance exercises. So if I want to get stronger at a deadlift and I need my glutes to get bigger, I need to make sure I'm doing activities in the 30 to 60 second time frame. So if I'm just doing other stupid heavy stuff at 10 seconds or less, thinking it's going to help, it won't. And that's why you're plateauing. Okay? So we want 20% of our training to be on the extremes and 80% of our training to be that stuff in the middle, that bread and butter, the good stuff. Okay? Now, if you're not aggressive, so if you come in and you hee-haw around and you're plateauing and you say, oh, I kind of lift, I train hard, but you're using like 20-pound dumbbells for 10 reps, you need to get stronger, okay? So I have a 6-year-old lady that can leg press 300 pounds on a leg press. So she can do 315 pounds for sets of 10. She's 60 years old. She has arthritis and osteoporosis. Okay? So if you are not 60 years old, if you do not have arthritis, if you do not have osteoporosis, and you are not leg pressing 315 pounds for 10 reps, what the hell? So you probably need to get stronger. So if you're plateauing and you're not getting better results, and you say you train hard, but look at everything you use. If everything you're using is lightweight, it might feel heavy to you. That's not what I'm saying. It will feel heavy to you. But if it's light, okay, if you're struggling to press 20-pound dumbbells, that is not strong enough to get progress. Okay? If you're barbell squatting under 100 pounds, it's not strong enough to get progress. So you have to get stronger so then you can lift heavier things to create more muscle damage. So like we said, you can't be on the extremes. You can't be super duper strong lifting really heavy single things and then wonder why you're not getting results. But likewise, you can't be lifting light weights in kind of like getting muscle burn, but there's nothing heavy enough. That's why you're not getting results. Okay? So think it over. Think of which way are you kind of falling in your training. Are you lifting too heavy too often, or are you not lifting heavy enough, often enough, or at all? So, and try to figure that out and work towards correcting some of that. So now, if you do want to lift heavier, and you don't think you're lifting heavy enough yet, and you're like, man, I do need to get up. I don't leg press 315 pounds. I need to get on that 60-year-old lady's level. Take your time, okay? Do progressions. So we've had podcasts in the past talking about progressions where you just kind of do your best that day for, say, 3 sets of 10. Next time you come in, try to do the same weight, but maybe 3 sets of 11 or 3 sets of 12. Once you can do that for a couple workouts, maybe next time you try to add weight. Just take small incremental steps, okay? So just 2 or 3 podcasts ago, we did a podcast for personal trainer education on how to progress a weak client. So if you're listening to this and you're saying, man, I need to get stronger, go listen to that podcast and go through the steps that we explained and help make yourself stronger. Okay? So you will plateau if you do the same things all the time and we do the same extremes. So if I lift too heavy too often, I'm going to plateau and I'm going to get injured probably. If I lift too light too often, I'm going to plateau because I'm not getting enough muscle damage. So like we said, don't be afraid of building muscle. You will only build muscle if you eat in excess, and it takes freaking months to build muscle. Okay? So if you do experience a little bit of a bloat after your first couple hard workouts, you got to let that stuff ride. You got to let it go through. Okay? Once your body gets a little bit used to it, your body will calm down. It won't have so much water retention. You can also watch your sodium intake the day after heavy lifting. The lower sodium you eat, the less water retention you'll feel. Also, make sure you're drinking enough water. Too often when people feel water retention, they cut out water, and then your body tries to hold on to everything because it's freaking out because it's not getting any water. So if you have water retention issues, drink more water, and that'll help flush out your system, okay? So try to drink up to like between a half a gallon to a gallon of water a day. And that'll help flush out the system, keep your sodium low. You can even reduce carbohydrates some if you want the next day because that'll help reduce water retention. So if that's your concern, you might have to just kind of grin and bear it for the first week or two and let your body get accustomed to it. You will not build 10 pounds of muscle in 2 weeks. You will not turn into a man in 2 weeks. So I wish